Before we begin this video, I just want to give a huge shout out to my top tier patron supporter, Daoist Soulweaver. I hope to God I've pronounced that correctly. If you want to go ahead and support this channel beyond the much appreciated like and subscription, then go down to the description and check out the link to my Patreon page. With that said, let's begin the video. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just got back from playing the Sonic Frontiers demo over at EGX, and by just got done playing, I mean played it over 3 weeks ago. Yeah, I'm a bit late for this one, but I did explain in a community post why it's taken me a while to get around to making this video. I mean, shortly after EGX I got ill, and then university started, and this is my 3rd year, so immediately from the get-go I've had a crap ton of work to do. And then also I was supposed to have a friend with me, but unfortunately he couldn't be here. It's just trying to get a time for us both to be able to sit down and record together, considering he also has university and his own job to worry about, and also he lives over an hour away. It's a bit difficult to find a good time for us to sit down together, so I just thought, screw it, I'll fly solo with this one. But I will talk about a couple of points that my friend did bring up, because I thought it was pretty interesting. But I'll do that a bit later down in the video. But I will say that from our experiences, he seemed to like the demo more than I did. Don't get me wrong, I really like this demo. In fact, a lot of this video is just going to be me hyping up this demo and how good a lot of aspects for it were, because I'm now more excited to play Sonic Frontiers than ever, and it blows my mind that we're just a few weeks away from Sonic Frontiers. I mean, literally November 8th. It is currently, what, today, the day I'm recording this, October 20th. So, insane. Before we actually get to talking about the content of the demo, though, I do want to point out two things about the demo. Number one is I only got to play in short bursts of about 15 to 20 minutes at a time, so I didn't get to experience a crazy amount of the game. I do feel like when I got to my 3rd playthrough, I experienced enough. I got, 3 Cyberspace Levels, 3 boss battles. I was able to get 1 Chaos Emerald and unlock the ability to get the 2nd Chaos Emerald, so that was pretty interesting. And so I do feel like I experienced a good amount of what the game has to offer in terms of the sort of beginning to be able to make an informed judgment about the demo. Again, this isn't an informed judgment about the entire game, and that therefore leads me on to my second point, which is that I do have criticisms. This wasn't perfect. I still had a ton of fun, but I still have criticisms. I have to look at this critically, and I do want to say that some of the criticisms that I do have may end up being invalidated by the time the actual game comes out, because they could have fixed a bunch of these issues. I was probably still technically playing an early build of the game. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for all the introduction stuff, so let's hop into actually talking about the demo itself. So the demo started with a cutscene of Sonic just being thrown onto the Kronos Islands, and he has no idea where he is and no idea where his friends are. Then a magical voice comes out of nowhere and pretty much says, hey, go get the emeralds now. And so Sonic does. He goes off on the adventure to go and collect the emeralds. I do want to point out something about the cutscenes that I did experience at the demo, is that they looked very grainy and pixelated, almost as though someone took the small 720p Nintendo Switch cutscenes and blew them up for a 1440p monitor, and honestly it didn't look too great, and it was very, very noticeable at times. It looked almost like static was all over the screen, and I'm guessing that's not by intentional design. It's kind of like a slightly amplified version of the issue that the Sonic Generations cutscenes on the Xbox 360 had, where people would complain that the cutscenes looked a bit pixelated in that. But yeah, I just thought that was something interesting to point out. Nothing that really affects the overall experience that much, but yeah, it's just something I noticed. But after that cutscene finished, we jumped straight into the tutorial, and the first thing we have to do is move the camera around. Fascinating. But right after that, we have to run through for a few seconds and then press 3 buttons, I guess just to show us how buttons work. But it's here where I started to actually move around with Sonic a bit, and I think this is a good time to actually talk about Sonic's controls as a whole, considering that they are a very big aspect, especially seeing as this is a platformer, and controls are extremely important in a platformer. And I have to say that Sonic's controls in this were surprisingly good. I was almost impressed for a moment there. With the boost games, you've come to think of Sonic as more of a tank-like being than anything else, with you constantly pushing your way through things and slightly turning Sonic as though it was, well, a tank. It was very difficult to control and make very precise movements with Sonic, and so precise platforming wasn't really something that was in the Boost games all too often. And yet here, I felt like I had full control over Sonic at all times. I was thoroughly impressed. Even at top speeds, Sonic still controlled extremely well. He had a very, very nice turning circle, and I could make these little tiny adjustments in precise movements. And the thing that really cemented this in for me is the fact that I was making death-defying jumps at certain points, over bottomless pits to land on extremely thin rails or to try and land on a loop or something. And that's the kind of jump that I wouldn't even attempt in a game like Sonic Forces. And yes, I'm going to rag on Sonic Forces a fair amount in this video because it's just such a... Sonic Forces is the perfect example of how not to do 3D Sonic. It literally gets every step wrong. And this, so far from the controls, seemed great. Now, I do have a small problem with the controls, but this is a problem that I can adjust to, unlike Sonic Forces, where you literally cannot adapt to those controls. Those controls were so awful, they had to automate all the levels just to try and stop you from seeing how awful those controls are. But I saw game, I saw. But the one criticism that I do have with Sonic Frontiers controls is that Sonic feels very weightless. Now, this isn't really a huge problem when running around on the ground, because like I said, I still feel like I have full control over Sonic, but it's when it comes to platforming that I felt like there was a small issue. Like, for example, this is difficult to explain, but Sonic's jump feels like it has that similar problem to Sonic Forces, where it almost took place in 2 stages. So you would jump, and if you keep holding down the jump button to go higher, it's almost like he activates some secret second double jump in midair, but it's not actually a double jump. And so that can make Sonic feel pretty floaty in midair, and a little bit imprecise, because he doesn't have any weight to him. Again, this is something that I can adapt to given time. Obviously, I didn't have the best amount of time to adapt, considering this was a demo. But I'm sure when the full game comes out, I'll be able to adapt to those controls pretty well. But yeah, I just thought that was something interesting, just Sonic's weightlessness. It just made him feel a little sensitive when you're doing simple platforming. Where it gets interesting, though, is the actual controls and the layout of the controls on the controller. Because Sonic Team have finally listened to the fans when it comes to the control layout, because the fans used to always, myself included, would always complain that, you know, all of Sonic's moves were all tied to one button. And it got really annoying when you want to do one move, but then you just end up doing another move, and it could be pace breaking. For example, in Adventure 2, you see a trail of rings, you're running at a nice high speed, you're like, oh damn, I want to keep this momentum going, let me light speed dash through a bunch of these rings to keep it all going. And then, you know, you just accidentally just do a somersault, and then you kill all the flow that you had going through that stage so far, and you just get really annoyed. And that's the kind of problem that this game doesn't have, because it has loads of its moves across a load of different buttons. First things first, boost is no longer on the square button, but is now on R2, and it feels so good to have boost on R2, especially since this is an open world game, so you're going to be running around a lot, and therefore boosting a lot to get to places faster. The boost on the triggers just feels so nice. But as well as that, the homing attack is back on the square button. We haven't seen that since Sonic Unleashed, and so it took a little bit of adapting to get used to that, but I did get used to it very quickly, much like Sonic Unleashed. And I think it actually works better being on its own button than just being the double jump, because, well, double jump is back in this game now. And it works about as well as it has in the past, and I'm not the biggest fan of the double jump to begin with, but it's there if you want to just do some quick corrections for platforming and whatnot. They also added the drop dash, just because they could, I guess. I know the drop dash is a really nice move for classic Sonic, and I do really enjoy it, but honestly, in this game, I never used it once. The only reason I learned about it is because it appeared as a tutorial, and also you get these little tutorial segments that are sort of, you know, just 2D, the background is white, and it's just about as basic of a tutorial segment as you can get. But the thing I really liked about this tutorial segment, I know I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, but this is an unscripted video, so just get used to it. But the reason why I'm talking about these loading screens is because, these tutorials, is that the loading screens are tutorials. And that's something I love. One thing I love is when a game has either interesting loading screens like the Ratchet and Clank games, or they have proactive loading screens where you can actually do something, so you're not just sitting there waiting for the game to load. And this game gives you tutorials in place of loading screens. And the cool thing is, the tutorial doesn't just randomly end when the game is ready to go. You just have to, when the game is ready to go, the game lets you know, and then you just push the start button to continue with the game, so you can stay on the tutorial for as long as you need to. So if you need to practice parrying, for an example, and a parrying tutorial appears, then you can just sit there and practice your parrying for as long as you need to until you start to get the timing down. And I'll talk about the combat in just a minute, but there's still a few more controls that I want to talk about. But getting back on track, another big control that I wanted to talk about is the air boost / dash. It's kind of like the perfect midpoint between the air boost and the dash, and as an air boost, it is almost the perfect point between the Sonic Unleashed air boost and the Sonic Forces air boost. The Sonic Unleashed air boost was really powerful, but you dropped off really quickly. So you had a really powerful boost that would shoot you in a direction really quick, but you would quickly succumb to the effects of gravity and start going downwards. So you have to make sure that when you used it, it was used properly in platforming. But the Sonic Forces one wasn't as ridiculously fast, but it was definitely a lot more floaty, and you could kind of just fly over half the level, because you'd sort of gain a bit of airtime first when you start boosting in midair, and then you'd very slowly go down. So you can, I'll probably try and find some footage and put it up here, but you could just skip over large chunks of stages because of how floaty and overpowered it felt. But this one is less of you being able to constantly boost in midair and more of you just being able to boost in midair for a quick burst as like an extended air dash from like Sonic Heroes or something. But it kind of mixes in the elements of both Unleashed air boost and Forces air boost, where you'll gain a little bit of airtime first, but that boost only lasts for a quick second and then you start coming down like normal. So it's more of a platforming tool than anything else, and I gotta say, I fucking love it as a platforming tool. I used it so much in the cyberspace stages to save my ass. But it would also just use that air boost to keep the flow of stages going, because now that it's not so overpowered, it's not as situational, so you could use it just to keep your momentum going through the stages. Well, not momentum speed, this isn't very momentum based. And that is another issue that I do have with the controls and physics of this game. One thing that I was really hoping for with this game was that it was at least the running around in the open world was going to be very momentum and physics based. I've brought up this game time and time again, and you're seeing gameplay of it now, but this fan game called Sonic Utopia, it just perfectly captured what I wanted from an open world Sonic game in terms of running around, or at least it set a good template for what I wanted. So you can see here how you just use all these surfaces, you use momentum, and you have to build up your momentum and be smart about your movements, but you could freely go anywhere, and it just felt so good. That is, like, honestly the definition of open zone and what I originally thought Sonic Team were going for, but here there isn't like any of that momentum based gameplay, so if you're expecting that, don't. But it was still fun enough to run around in the open world. But I think that's pretty much all I really have to say about Sonic's movement controls. I mean, obviously he has some of the parkour stuff like we saw in the trailers, wall climbing, wall jumping, wall running, all that stuff was also there. I didn't get to play around with it too much. We didn't get really any segments where I could play around with it, at least before the timer did run out. But I did get a couple of tutorial segments where I did get to mess around with a couple of those features, and they seemed to work perfectly fine, so yeah. But the one thing that I absolutely love, and I did just talk about this, is the fact that because all of these controls are on separate buttons, it just makes it feel like Sonic has more of a flow to his movements now, because again, you can't interrupt yourself by accidentally doing the wrong action, so you're constantly in control of Sonic, and that is perfect for an open world sort of Sonic game, open zone Sonic game. So getting back to the event of the demo itself, right after pushing those 3 buttons, you get put into a quick bit of combat where you're just taught how to homing attack, obviously with the square button this time. And that's pretty cool. And then immediately after that, you just do some more running, and then you run into another series of enemies that you can also attack. And it was here where I got to kind of experiment with the combat a little bit, and I truly mean a little bit, because this demo didn't really give you a chance to explore much in the way of combat aside from homing attacks, chain attacks, and Cyloop abilities. But that was pretty much it. Obviously, again, 20 minutes, what can you do? But from what I experienced, it seemed to work pretty fine. The homing attack worked great, and if you keep pushing the homing attack button after landing a homing attack, that's when you do Sonic's series of attacks that we've seen in all of the trailers pretty much. And yeah, it functions perfectly fine, and you can go straight off of finishing that chain into another homing attack and then go straight into another chain. Obviously, you're meant to attach new attacks to it as you unlock those new attacks via the skill tree, but again, the only skill we were able to unlock was the Cyloop. I will say though that it was pretty nice to see some squash and stretch when it came to Sonic's animations here during the punches and the kicks, and I think that's something that this demo had done pretty well, and this game looks like it's going to do pretty well, and that's make Sonic feel more animated. You know, add that squash and stretch, make it feel like there's some life to Sonic here. You know, you go back to Sonic Forces, barely any animation at all. The game felt so stale because of it. There was no idle animations, and Sonic just always had like the same recovery animation from homing attacks, and he always had like, it felt like he just had that preset animations, and then that was it. It was just a few preset animations and nothing more than that. This game kind of fixes that, which I was impressed by. You know, in the cutscenes, for example, Sonic is always doing little things like tapping his arm and just feeling more alive. And then even in the gameplay, like I said, the squash and stretch with some of the animations, but also something that I noticed that was really cool is if you're running around the open world at top speed and you gain a little bit of airtime because you just go off a short little hill or something, well, a little hump in the grass or anything like that, you just gain that tiny little bit of air for a quick second. So you won't just be in the air for a second like previous Sonic games. Sonic will now just do like a little flip before landing back, and then you continue running. So again, it just makes Sonic feel more alive in this game, and it's just those cool little details like that that I think will really help this game to feel much better, especially since you're playing as Sonic. This isn't like Grand Theft Auto, for example, where you're just playing an open world as, you know, a human. But this time you're playing an open zone. I know I keep confusing the two, but you're playing an open zone as an anthropomorphic hedgehog that can run at light speed. So yeah, it really opens up that little scope, and just adding all these little extra animations just makes it, that running around and exploring feel so much better. But yeah, let's get back to the combat for a second, because I do want to talk about the open world itself a little bit later. So it was right after this sort of combat section, you just do a little bit more platforming, and then you run into the first boss of the game, which was the ninja boss that we saw in some of the leaked gameplay, and I think he's been in a couple of the trailers now. And this ninja boss is a really good introductory boss. Can I just say first off that I really like the design of all the enemies in this game. They're not as bland as the enemies in Sonic Forces. I know Sonic Forces, yeah, like I said, I'm going to take so many jabs at that game, so if you for some reason like Sonic Forces, sorry, I guess. But yeah, I really do like the design of these enemies, but that's secondary. But this is such a cool introductory boss to set you up for how the combat isn't just going to be the normal standard Sonic the Hedgehog, you know, do a few homing attacks over and over again, that kind of combat. What it is this time around is that now you have to be a bit more thoughtful with how you approach. Like we saw in some of the trailers, certain enemies require, you know, unique ways of approaching them. So you have to wait for an opening or use the Cyloop to force an opening in your enemies before attacking them. So you can't just always just dive in head first. So that is just something that I thought is really good. But what this ninja boss does, the first thing that happens when you go into the boss, the text box that appears, tutorial box, I mean, you get taught how to lock on. The lock on works perfectly fine. Click in R3 like a Souls game. That's good. And the lock on works great. No worries there. But the other thing that it says is to watch the enemy's patterns of attacks carefully and wait for an opening. Because this isn't like a boss like in the adventure games or in Sonic Rush, for example, where you see always a clear opening. This is more like an ARPG style where you've got to sort of pick out your own openings. You have to sort of understand the boss's movements and learn for yourself when the openings are. And it's really cool that you actually get punished for diving in head first, because this ninja, you can't just keep attacking it. You dive in when the ninja's attacking, then obviously you're gonna get hit. So you're running around waiting. But what I thought was really cool is how this combat showcased to me just how much flow there is. So I was diving in and doing a homing attack, and then I chained a couple of attacks by pushing the homing attack again a couple of times, and then I saw immediately that he was readying to attack. In that moment, I went, oh shit. I pulled back on the controller and pushed the boost button and immediately stopped my combo of attacks to boost away, and I was able to successfully dodge the attack, and it just flowed so nicely the way I was able to go in and out. You take Shadow the Hedgehog, for example, from Sonic 06. He had a similar thing where you would homing attack and then you could keep pushing the homing attack button again and again to do a series of combos. But the problem is, Shadow at that point felt like he was stuck in place, and it got even worse if you would activate the Chaos abilities, because then Shadow would just feel like he would get stuck in place, and you physically cannot move him at all until he falls to the ground. But this one, there's just that nice constant flow. Like I said, this game does a very good job of making you feel like you're always in control of Sonic. Like I said, with combat as well, you also have dodging. You literally can dodge roll in either direction if you're locked onto an enemy by pushing either R1 or L1. Sonic will do like a sort of cartwheel to the left or right, similar to the quick step from, I want to say, Sonic Forces, more so than Sonic Unleashed. So it works just fine. I didn't really see an issue. I didn't end up using it. I more so just dashed backwards to dodge and then just went around and then attacked him again. But as well as that, you can parry. I didn't get to play around with the parrying too much, but the few times that I did get to play around with it, it seemed to work perfectly fine. You push L1 and R1 at the exact same time with good timing in terms of the enemy's attack, and you can parry them to leave them open and stunned so that you can go in and start attacking them. So yeah, no issues with that. So in terms of the combat, it looked pretty damn good, and a few days ago, I think, or last week, we got a combat trailer from the official Sonic the Hedgehog channel, and that showcased the combat in a bit more depth, and that just really hyped me up for the combat even more, because the combat looks really good now. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it for what I want to talk about when it comes to the combat, or at least what I got to experience with the combat. So to talk about XP for a moment, XP in this game is achieved by destroying enemies and you earn little shards of XP. Those shards then build up to give you full XP points, and those points can then subsequently be spent on the skill tree to unlock skills. Now the first upgrade that you get in this game, and the only upgrade that I was able to get in this demo, was the Cyloop, and like I said earlier, the Cyloop works exactly as advertised in the trailers. You can use it to solve puzzles, and you can use it to disrupt enemies so that you can gain yourself an opening to then attack them. And speaking of puzzles, the puzzle in this game, or at least what I experienced, was extremely simplistic. I'm hoping it gets more difficult in the future. I'm expecting it to. I mean, if it stays the level that it did, then I'll be thoroughly unimpressed. But they were pretty easy, but what these puzzles do is by beating these puzzles, you actually unlock more of the map. So the map is basically hidden from you, and you have to beat these puzzles, and then beating these puzzles will reward you by showing you a small portion of the map and certain collectibles in that portion of the map. So these puzzles aren't just there now, but you now have incentive to want to solve those puzzles so that you can unlock more of the map, so you can make sure you don't miss anything, because you want to go into each area more powerful than you came in. So yeah, I thought that was just a pretty interesting use of the puzzles. But it's right after getting the Cyloop ability and doing some very, very simple puzzles that you actually reach the first cyberspace portal. Now, to unlock the first cyberspace portal, actually just to unlock any cyberspace portal, you need gears, and special enemies and bosses like the ninja and the tower enemy that you fight immediately after reaching this area, and of course the big hand smashy bashy guy, what was his name? Asura, I think his boss name is. It's beating those guys that nets you gears. So then again, it's incentivizing you to want to fight these harder to beat, more difficult enemies. Other than just for the sake of fighting them, you now have a reason to want to fight them, because then you unlock the cyberspace levels, and you need to unlock the cyberspace levels so that you can unlock the chaos emeralds. It just feels like everything is leading up to something. There's nothing that's just here just to be here. Actually, hold that thought until I get back to talking about the open world. But yeah, you needed a couple of gears to enter here, and by beating the ninja boss, you only got one gear. So you have to then fight another boss fight, which is the tower boss. Tower boss is pretty simple. You just sort of have to homing attack it on its exposed areas, and that sounded very weird. But yeah, you have to attack it on its exposed areas, and then once you beat it, you'll get a couple of gears, and then you can unlock the first cyberspace level. And now it's time to talk about the cyberspace levels. Oh boy, do I have some thoughts here, because this is the part of the game for me where I was just like, it was alright. It unfortunately does carry over some issues from games like Sonic Colors and Sonic Forces. First things first, these levels are way too short. I mean, God, they're like a minute long each. And that's just me going through them at like sort of casual speeds, not even me trying to beat it as fast as I can. And, you know, just being about a minute to a minute 10, that doesn't set a good precedent. I, and I'm sure many other Sonic fans, do enjoy, you know, the Sonic levels to feel a bit more fleshed out, because these Sonic levels just finish before they really feel like they're starting to get started. You know, you're just sitting down, you're playing through this level, you're about a minute in, you're starting to get into a nice groove, you're like, oh, okay, this level's pretty cool, I'm starting to really enjoy this atmosphere, the music is now like properly kicking in for me, and then the level just ends really quickly. I'm not sure if the levels get longer as you go on. Again, I'm hoping they do, but if all the levels are once again repeating the sort of Sonic Forces thing where they're only going to be about a minute long, then that is thoroughly disappointing. As for the level design here, I'm glad to say there was a much larger focus on 3D. In fact, I played one cyberspace level that was just fully 3D, which was great. And that unfortunately leads to another criticism, where one of the cyberspace levels was fully 2D, and I'm not the biggest fan of modern Sonic in 2D. I just don't think it works that well. Again, here it's not that bad because the controls here are much better than Sonic Forces, and so I can actually land on platforms. And the level design isn't as bad as Sonic Forces. Just, this game is just not as bad as Sonic Forces. Does everything better than Sonic Forces. Literally, so far from what I've seen, it's doing everything better than Sonic Forces. There were times where the level design did feel kind of familiar. I can't quite put my head around it. Maybe it's just because I was playing levels that were essentially Sky Sanctuary again and Green Hill again, stuff like that. But some of this level design did feel a bit familiar, and it was pretty fun, but again, it was only fun for about a minute. The music that was playing, though, is pretty interesting. I did enjoy the music to an extent that was playing, but it definitely gives a lot of vibes from the sort of Avatar, the custom Avatars music from Sonic Forces, and I'm not the biggest fan of that type of music. It's just not my type of music. I'm not a big fan of how like artificial and just synth heavy, if that's the correct term, it all sounds. But this one actually sounded pretty solid. In fact, I think a couple of days ago on the official Sonic the Hedgehog channel, there was a Cyberspace DJ mix that was put up that showcased a small portion of the music that plays during some of these cyberspace levels. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, the music was not bad. The level design was pretty solid at times, but it just carries over some of the issues, like emphasis on 2D a bit too much in some areas, and obviously the short level length. Again, could only be those issues in these early parts, but if it does carry on throughout the game, that's going to be one pretty big negative for me. So that's the cyberspace level out of the way, and it's after this cyberspace level that the game like properly opens up into the open zone bit. And before I actually talk about that, I want to talk a bit about, well, the actual open world and open zone itself, and also the tutorial area just before it, again, because that was a lot of the actual experience that I got. I did notice, and this caught my eye, and going back to what I said earlier about there just nothing being here for the sake of being here, but right after you finish the second set of enemies as part of the tutorial, there's this weird sort of pyramid structure, and there's multiple ways to get up it, or you can try and find your own way up, which is what I did because I thought that was more fun. I love it when games just leave you to find your own way to solve something or sort something out yourself. And this weird pyramid structure was there, and I thought, oh, this is part of the tutorial, right? And I climbed all the way to the top, and all it gave you was 10 rings. And that's when it hit me, alright, this is an open zone game. So I'm hoping that they do this as well, where not only do they have the puzzles and all that extra stuff, and obviously cyberspace levels, bosses, what have you, that you just find out in the wild, that it has a lot of these just things for you to just experience that are just there for the sake of being there, that are just part of the open world to make the world feel a bit more natural, because the world right now doesn't exactly feel very natural. This is a point that was brought up a lot during the initial reveal of the game. But the game looks very, very artificial and almost like a mod, with how there's just random rails placed all over the place, and how there's just, floating platforms in the middle of nowhere. It just doesn't feel consistent as part of the world. You know, you dive into a game like Elden Ring, for example, and you can buy that pretty much everything you see is part of that game's world. Nothing really feels out of place. But here, that isn't really the case, and I'm hoping that they actually give an explanation about all the floating rails and stuff, because if not, it's a little bit of a... what's the word I'm looking for? It kills the illusion, right? It just kills the illusion a bit of the world that you're in. Nothing too bad, but it's just something that I noticed. But what I was saying about that pyramid structure is that if there are those sort of things all over the world, not those pyramids specifically, but just loads of little things that you can just discover for yourself and then just get a little reward out of for exploring, that's a cool thing. Because that's the kind of thing that open world games can get away with. Because open world games have this magical power that linear games can't get away with, which is that when you come across something that's even small and mediocre, like that little pyramid that only gives you 10 rings, it still feels pretty satisfying to find it, because it's an open world. It feels like you're the one who discovered that. It feels like you found that. And so even those mediocre discoveries can feel good, because it's almost as though you found them. You know, again, going back to Elden Ring, if I'm just walking around and I find a small dungeon, I go into it, I finish it, and I get a reward that's completely worthless and a boss fight that was pretty average, I'd still come out of that and I'd still go, wow, you know what, it's pretty cool I discovered that. It's pretty cool that that was just there, just for the sake of it. So I'm hoping that Sonic Frontiers takes advantage of the fact that it is an open game and has all this kind of stuff just all over the place just for you to discover, and really fill the world out so that the world is never boring to run around, that you're constantly discovering things and you're constantly like, man, I need to continue with the story, but there's all this side shit that I just can do along the way. If this game has tons of that, I'm all in. That's just good design. But going back to the early tutorial area with the level design and how much more linear it is, it definitely gave me vibes of Sonic Adventure 2, where the game would just give you multiple ways to get to the same area, but not like, 3 different set paths where you have like the sort of bottom path, middle path, higher path, and one's the fastest but the trickiest to navigate. It's nothing in depth like that, but it's small things like how in the tutorial area you could scale these 3 rocks and you have to climb up them. Now you can just jump up them normally, or if you go to the right hand side you can break a box and there's a spring there that you can just use that to get up to the top of the rocks. Or if you go to the left, there's a rail that you can grind, and that will get you to the top of the rocks. It's just those small little things, but the fact that that's there, just makes it feel like, the level designers actually put a bit of thought into traversal here and giving you just those little options, again, to make it feel like this is more your adventure and you're choosing how you're navigating through this world, not going through this world how the developers wanted to go through. It's more of a kind of illusion more than anything else, but it's just cool that that kind of thing is there. And as for the actual open zone itself, again, I didn't get to experience much because once I got into the open zone bit, there was two main things that happened. One, I found Amy sort of locked up in this holographic prison thing, and we saw a little bit of Sage. And two, the big hand smashy bashy boss fight, Asura, that's his name. His boss fight was there. Actually, let's talk about Asura's boss fight for a second, considering that this is where I also found like a small issue with the game as well. It was during this boss fight that I found some collision detection issues, and it made me feel as though I kind of lost that control that I had over Sonic. So for example, when he slams his hand down and you're supposed to run up his hand, it felt like a 50-50 if I was gonna make it to the top, because sometimes I'd just be running up and Sonic would just ping off to one side. And not like really badly, and it wasn't constant, but it did happen, and when it did happen, it was pretty noticeable. But as well as that, it's when you reach the top, you have this homing attack and then chain attack his antenna horns. I'm gonna say horns. You have to attack those horns at the top in order to make one of his arms fall off, and it worked fine for the first arm, but when it came round to the second arm, a small laser gate appears at the bottom of his horn, so telling you have to attack the horn from the top now, and that's fine. I did. I homing attacked directly to the top of the horn, but it still pushed me back, as though my homing attack didn't land and I got hit by the laser gate. And I know for a fact that I wasn't anywhere near the laser gate, and yet I still got pushed back, and it was still treated as though I hit that laser gate. So, yeah, I think that was just a small issue that I found. But a really cool thing that I did notice is how you can use the Cyloop ability on this boss to lift up his leg to then attack the bottom of Asura's leg to get extra gears. I think that's a really cool thing that they're doing there, incentivizing you to approach bosses in more ways than just one, so that you can get more gears, so more rewards essentially, so that you can have an easier time getting into cyberspace. Again, everything feels like a progression. You're doing something to do something else. So it never really feels like, aside from that pyramid thing I mentioned earlier, it never really feels like you're just doing something for no particular reason, which I think is a pretty good thing overall. But the level design in the actual open area it was more like little pockets of level design. There was never really anything consistent, but it was just like, I'd go to this one area and there'd be a set of platforms and then some homing attacks that I could do, or I could find this big tower and start running up it. Stuff like that. It was like little disconnected bits of platforming, but I expected that. It's not anything too bad. I'm not a big fan of the rails in this game. I've said it before, I much prefer the rails from games like Sonic Adventure 2, where you had to, balance yourself, and you have to build up momentum, but if you weren't balanced properly, you could lose momentum. So it made rails feel a lot more risk versus reward, and definitely made them momentum based. The rails in this game always have you moving at the same speeds unless you're boosting on them. And it works exactly as the rails did in Sonic Forces. You can jump between rails using the triggers. Oh, sorry, not using the triggers, just flicking left or right. And it's really simplistic. So I would always, if I was going to do any platforming in this game, I'm probably going to always try and find ways to avoid the rails so that I can just actually play the game, considering how automated the rails feel here. But yeah, level design can feel disconnected like that, but again, this is the open zone area. There's no way that we're going to have one giant bit of consistent platforming level design. That would be the most insane thing. But yeah, it wasn't anything too bad. Again, I didn't get to see too much because it was shortly after this that I entered the second cyberspace level, and then my time ran out. Actually, no, my time ran out part way into the third cyberspace level. But yeah, that was pretty interesting. To speak about the graphics on this game, because I know there are people out there who do care about the graphics. Graphically, this game is about on par with Sonic Forces. It doesn't feel like too much of a step up from Sonic Forces, and I think that's mostly because of the Nintendo Switch and the fact that this was being made for the Switch. And obviously the Switch is underpowered when compared to other consoles. I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that the fact that it's made on the Switch is going to ruin this game or anything, because, we got games like Breath of the Wild on the Nintendo Switch. So Nintendo Switch can put out great games. I'm just saying that graphically this game is on a similar level to Forces, and even though it is on a similar level to Forces, it feels like it's a lot better. And I think the reason why it feels like it's a lot better here is because unlike Sonic Forces, there's a definite clear vision for this game. There's a clear art style. This game is going for something, and it's putting all of its visual fidelity into going towards that. So whilst graphically it may be similar to Sonic Forces, at least from what I saw, from an art style perspective, it's definitely got a clearer vision, and so that makes it feel like the game looks a lot better, because there were some low resolution areas and there was a little bit of pop-in, nowhere near as bad as the IGN First's pop-in when they were running around and you would just see pop-in everywhere you went. But yeah, graphically it still looks really, really nice, and if this game runs at a consistent frame rate on the Nintendo Switch, I'll be impressed. But yeah, that's pretty much what I gotta say for graphics. OST as well, I spoke briefly about the music in the Cyberspace Levels. It's pretty solid. Again, not my personal choice for music, but the ambient music that played outside of that was really good. I really enjoyed the ambient music, the softer, more melancholic music pieces playing as you were just running around. That I thought was really awesome. And of course we had I'm Here, I think that's supposed to be the main theme for the game. That was pretty solid, but then you had 10K Rock's Vandalize. Vandalize was so good, man. I still listen to Vandalize now. It's on my playlist, and I've been listening to it a lot. It's such a good song, and yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say for the OST. But I think I should just dive into my final thoughts right now, seeing as we're close to Sonic Frontier's release. My overall impression of the demo was that this was really, really good. I had a lot more fun than I was expecting, and it's a good sign when a demo gets me more excited to play a game than more depressed. You know, this isn't the Balan Wonderworld demo, this is the Sonic Frontiers demo, and it's done a good job at making me want to play the game even more than I originally wanted to. I mean, I was going to buy the game anyways, just because I am a Sonic fan, and obviously I have this channel, so I've basically had no choice but to buy the game. But now I 110% want to own this game. And my friend said the exact same thing as well, because like I said, I think he had more fun with this demo than I did. He didn't have any issues with the cyberspace levels like I have, but then again, he has no base of reference because he hasn't really played any Sonic games. But he had a ton of fun playing this game. Well, this demo anyways, and he said, and I won't forget this, because he actually turned to me right after we played the demo for the third time. He turned to me and said, this might actually be the first Sonic game that I genuinely buy and play, because he enjoyed the demo that much. So, you know, I think that says a lot about how casual audiences will respond to this game, because, you know, if most other people who aren't Sonic fans respond to this game in a similar way to how my friend did, then we're looking good. Because honestly, when it came to this game, I was kind of hoping for this game to click knuckles. I was kind of hoping for this game to be at least a sort of 7 or an 8 out of 10 at minimum. And the reason why I wanted it to be at that sort of level, obviously I would like for it to be higher, and if it is higher, that's going to be great, but I wanted it to be minimum that sort of level of a 7 or an 8 out of 10, because then that will let Sonic Team know, that will let Sega know, and that this is, you know, the type of game that they should be striving for in the future, and it can lay the potential foundations for a sequel, or maybe even lay the groundwork for Sonic Adventure 3. We saw in an interview that Takashi Iizuka really wants to make Sonic Adventure 3, and he kind of made it sound like Sonic Adventure 3's development kind of hinged on the success of this game. So if this game ends up being pretty well received at the very least, you know, getting a great status or something like that, then that definitely lays the foundations, because you can only go up, right, if you've laid a good foundation. Hopefully, you know, Sonic Team doesn't immediately change this up, kind of like what happened after Generations, where they switched from the boost formula straight to Lost World's more slower parkour Mario styled formula. And I hope that they just continue to refine and improve this open zone formula, because I think this can be an absolute success. But yeah, I definitely had a ton of fun with this demo, and despite my issues that I did have, You know, these issues aren't on the same caliber as the issues that I do have with a game like Sonic Forces. I didn't get to experience barely any of the story or the characters. I did see one cutscene with Eggman, but unfortunately, like I said, for that playthrough of the game that I was doing, which was my third playthrough of the demo, my sound wasn't working, so I didn't get to hear what he sounded like. Roger Craig Smith sounded pretty good, but again, I feel like... I know I'm probably going to get some hate for this, but I do genuinely feel like whilst his delivery is good and everything, and hopefully the script is a lot better so he can actually, you know, perform without the inhibition of just a bad script, and so we get to actually see him do well. I do feel like the design of Sonic in this game, seeing as it's the same model that was ripped from Forces, I do feel like that's holding him back a little bit. Because I do not look at that model, this shorter spined, slightly lighter blue model that more resembles classic Sonic, and think of Roger's delivery, especially since Roger in this game is going for a little bit of a deeper voiced performance. Sonic definitely feels a little older here thanks to his deeper voice, and I think that a design more akin to his design in Sonic 06, the slightly taller design, I think that would have worked off a lot better in terms of Roger's delivery. But yeah, if I were to give this demo a rating, which I really shouldn't because this was just a demo, but if I were to give it a rating, I'd probably set it at around an 8 out of 10. I had a ton of fun here, despite some of the flaws and issues. And again, this was only just the beginning of the game. I can only imagine that if they can ride off of this momentum from the beginning of the game properly, and it constantly just gets better and better, then we're looking at a 9 or maybe even a Sonic game that could push a 10 out of 10 here, which is just great. You know, I've been waiting for you know, an amazing Sonic game for so long now, because the last like great Sonic game that we got that was part of the mainline and excluding Sonic Mania was Sonic Generations, because then it was Lost World and then Forces. Lost World was it was okay. Forces was like just the worst main game, so this could be a phenomenal redemption for Sonic's video game career, seeing as, you know, he's kind of the punching bag of the video game community, especially after games like Sonic Boom and Sonic 06. But I have very high hopes. But, you know, if you're somebody who played the demo at EGX, or you've played a demo elsewhere, what are your thoughts? Or if you're somebody who hasn't played the demo but you've been watching a ton of these videos in pure anticipation for Sonic Frontiers, what are your thoughts as well? Leave them all in the comments below. I'll respond to as many comments as I can get around to. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. If you did enjoy this video, then remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to keep up with all future content. If you really enjoyed this content and you want to go a step further in supporting this channel, then definitely head on over and check out my Patreon to see how you can do that. And speaking of which, as always, big thank you to my patrons. You guys are absolute legends. But with all that said, I do truly hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys next time.